Hello, welcome back to History Sleuth. Today I wanted to return to a topic that I've covered before, which is the 1619 Project. And this time, instead of criticizing it, I want to actually defend it from some whack comments that Senator Tom Cotton made about a week ago. But before we get into that, if you're on Twitter, follow me at Sleuth History to get updates about when I post new episodes. And honestly, it is through Twitter that I was made aware of the things that Senator Cotton had been saying. So, if you want to be in the loop on all that, go find me on Twitter. Yeah, so there's a lot here, honestly, and taking notes on this and researching all of this has made my brain hurt because there's so much going on. So let's just get straight into it. Here's what I said last time about the 1619 Project. I actually did an episode on this already. It was my third episode, which feels like a really long time ago and yesterday all at once, but I guess that's 2020 for you. What I said last time was basically the 1619 Project is about the origins of American slavery. And it kind of suggests that we should consider 1619, the year, to be the birth of our country rather than 1776, because 1619 was the year when the first slave arrived in the American colonies. The first slave ship and stuff. And I said in episode 3 that I think there's a lot of good in this project and a lot of interesting things to consider when reframing our understanding of our country's history. I'm wary of people who put the founding fathers on a pedestal, and I think that this project is wary of those things too, so I respect that. However, there are a lot of criticisms to be pointed out. I think this project would have been better if it had a stronger historical aspect to it, if it was more focused on history and less on the implications of slavery in 2020, because even suggesting that slavery has an impact on 2020 is hard for some people to conceptualize, though it is true. It's difficult for people to swallow. So for the whole project to basically be about that, it's kind of challenging for regular readers as well as historians, because in this project, history is used as more of a prop than the main focus. Yeah, so pretty much throughout that episode, I was critical, but more so of the way that they look at and use history rather than the actual content of the 1619 Project. Yeah, and like I said already, in this episode, I'm going to defend the 1619 Project, because you can do both. You can do both. I'm about to. Okay. So there was a lot of stuff going on Twitter, like I said, but I also found an article on The Guardian that just gets right into it. And so that's what I'm going to look at. First, this article will be linked in my description if you would like to check it out for yourself or read along as we go. The title is Tom Cotton Calls Slavery Necessary Evil in Attack on the New York Times 1619 Project. Whew. There's a lot to get into just with that one sentence. First off, using the words necessary and evil back to back should cause somebody to stop and rethink what you're saying. That's some Disney villain stuff right there. Yeah, that's frightening. Here's a quote beginning the article from The Guardian. Cotton, widely seen as a possible presidential candidate in 2024, made the comment in an interview with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette published on Sunday. He was speaking in support of legislation he introduced on Thursday that aims to prohibit use of federal funds to teach the 1619 Project, an initiative from the New York Times that reframes U.S. history around August 1619 and the arrival of slave ships on American shores for the first time. Cotton's Saving American History Act of 2020... oh, gosh. Sorry, I didn't really... process what the title of his legislation was until right now. Saving American History. All right, well, that's ridiculous. Okay. Anyway, his act would prohibit the use of federal funds to teach the 1619 Project by K-12 schools or school districts, according to a statement from the senator's office. And here is a quote from Cotton that he told the Democrat Gazette, which actually that article we'll look at next after this one. But the quote is, "The entire premise of the New York Times factually, historically flawed 1619 Project is that America is at root a systematically racist country to the core and irredeemable. I reject that root and branch. America is a great and noble country founded on the proposition that all mankind is created equal. We have always struggled to live up to that promise, but no country has ever done more to achieve it." End quote. Okay, there is so much to break down here. Senator Cotton says some good things mixed in with some wacky things. So first, he says that the 1619 Project is historically flawed because he says he claims that it says America is, at its root, a systematically racist country to the core and irredeemable. That is not why the 1619 Project is historically flawed. I think the project does have its flaws, but I already went over that, like I said, episode 3. For the rest of his quote, I believe America is at root a systematically racist country because at the origins of America, systematic racism was protected with the continuation of the institution of slavery, which was fundamentally racist. However, that does not make our country irredeemable. We can recover from that. We are still in the process of recovering from slavery. No one is saying that if we acknowledge the evil of slavery, that makes America evil. There is work to be done to redeem America from this past. Okay, and then the rest of that quote was, America is a great and noble country founded on the proposition that all mankind is created equal. We've always struggled to live up to that promise, but no country has ever done more to achieve it. Okay, sure, yes. It's true that the idea of equality is one that our country's founders professed at the beginning, and that's something we've always struggled to live up to. Those things are all true. I wouldn't say, though, that no other country has done more to achieve equality. That's not even, difficult to argue. Here you go. Who's your favorite female world leader and why isn't she an American? I'll let you think about that one yourself. Let's move on. Cotton added, we have to study the history of slavery and its role and impact on the development of our country because otherwise we can't understand our country. As the Founding Fathers said, it was the necessary evil upon which the Union was built. But the Union was built in a way, as Lincoln said, to put slavery on the course to its ultimate extinction. I realize I'm going 100 miles a minute. I'm going to breathe for a minute. Think about that quote. Remember this quote, because we're going to come back to it. This is the moment right here where Senator Cotton messed up. If he had just phrased that a little bit differently, he would be in the clear. But no, he had to give me a whole episode worth of content. Something to get fired up about. He just had to. Okay, so that first sentence was fine. We do have to study the history of American slavery because otherwise we can't understand America. Yes. But then we get to the problem. Mr. Cotton said, as the Founding Fathers said, it was the necessary evil upon which the Union was built. But the Union was built in a way, as Lincoln said, to put slavery on the course to its ultimate extinction. First, evil is never necessary. Second, slavery was never necessary. It existed, yes. It was difficult to get rid of, absolutely, but it obviously wasn't impossible to abolish. It seems like Senator Cotton meant to quote someone here, but he actually just projects the idea of the Founding Fathers instead of picking anyone in particular and using a historical source. As we talked about in my last episode about Hamilton, all the Founding Fathers were racist. That just kind of goes without saying. Of course, they would say that slavery was a necessary evil because they all benefited from it. Washington enslaved people, Jefferson enslaved people, Hamilton managed the people enslaved by his extended family. Just because they said or suggested that it was necessary doesn't mean that we have to believe them. Also, Senator Cotton's point would have been better made if he had picked a quote from one of those men who claimed that slavery was a necessary evil or something. I'm not really sure what he was trying to get at here. Let me look at it again. So, okay, he says we have to study the history of slavery and its role and impact on the development of our country because otherwise we can't understand our country. If he had just changed this next part, instead of saying as the Founding Fathers said, if he just said as the Founding Fathers believed slavery was a necessary evil, or just putting it, the Founding Fathers believed that slavery was a necessary evil, and that's why it remained, and so we have to deal with it. This whole, I think he's trying to apologize for the Founding Fathers and Lincoln, or not apologize, not in that sense, but make excuses for them, and kind of excuse their involvement in slavery because they were trying to end it. But that's not true, and also not necessary. For Cotton to do so. Yeah, just because they made these choices doesn't mean that we have to support that. Okay, I want to talk about too. Senator Cotton invokes the name of Lincoln, one of our least debated, least controversial historical figures, to try and suggest hey, they got rid of slavery, they worked to get rid of slavery, they were trying. Okay, first, the Founding Fathers, no, they weren't working to get rid of slavery. They purposefully ignored it and tried to maintain the status quo, which was slavery, and for Lincoln's time, He worked to maintain the status quo of white supremacy. Yes, Lincoln passed the 13th Amendment and abolished slavery, and I love that for him, but he was also a white supremacist. He saw that getting rid of slavery was the only way to win the war, and that was his goal, more so than abolishing slavery. And he was able to pass the 13th Amendment and kind of argue for it by promising white Americans that they would stay in power, which is racist, in case you didn't know. There are quotes from him supporting these points that I just made at the Lincoln Memorial, so don't fight me on it. Just go to D.C. So all in all, Senator Cotton demonstrates his terrible understanding of history by not quoting anyone in particular, misrepresenting the Founding Fathers, and trying to protect his point with the same excuses historical white supremacists used about continuing the evil of slavery. Well done, sir. Continuing in the article from The Guardian, Nikole Hannah-Jones, who was awarded this year's Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her introductory essay to the 1619 Project, said on Friday that Cotton's bill, quote, speaks to the power of journalism more than anything I've ever done in my career. So, good for her, I guess. On Sunday, she tweeted, if slavery, heritable, generational, permanent, race-based slavery, where it was legal to rape, torture, and sell human beings for profit, if it is a means to an end. Imagine thinking a non-divisive curriculum is one that tells Black children the buying and selling of their ancestors, the rape, torture, and forced labor of their ancestors for profit was a necessary evil for the creation of the noblest country the world has ever seen. So, was slavery foundational to the Union on which it was built or not? You heard it from Tom Cotton himself. So that's a lot. I think Hannah-Jones does a great job basically summing up what I'm trying to get at with this whole episode. So I love that. And then the article also records that Cotton responded to that on Twitter by saying, more lies from the debunked 1619 Project, describing the, and then italics, views of the founders, and italics, and how they put the evil institution on a path to extinction. A point frequently made by Lincoln is not endorsing or justifying slavery. No surprise that the 1619 Project can't get facts right. All right, so he's back again, invoking the name of Abraham Lincoln, who was a white supremacist, by the way. So, I don't know why you think he's like some sort of authority in this conversation. He's not. Cotton, okay, which, by the way, I can't get over that, like, that's his real name. His name is actually Tom Cotton. And he's... I'm sorry. He's defending slavery and his last name is Cotton. Think about that one for a minute. Okay, so Cotton emphasizes that he was describing the views of early Americans and not his own. But those weren't the views of early Americans. Trying to put slavery on the path to extinction, like maybe that's what they said, but that's not what they were doing. And again, you can't use Lincoln as an excuse because, though he was a great president and did good stuff, he was a white supremacist. As in, he was in favor of continuing to oppress people of color even while he abolished slavery, because he was racist. Okay? That's difficult, I know. To come for Lincoln and accuse him of these things is difficult for a lot of people because I think as Americans, generally our favorite president is Lincoln because he did a lot of good stuff. And you know, I think Lincoln had difficult challenges in his presidency, and he made good choices in the midst of those challenges while still being racist. Like, those things can coexist. He doesn't have to not be racist to also not be a good president. We've had so many racist presidents. The bar is very low. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is down to the original article that The Guardian was quoting a little bit, in which Tom Cotton said things. So it's called the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and it will also be linked in my description. So it says, if the Saving American History Act of 2020 becomes law, school districts using the 1619 Project curriculum could face financial consequences. Cotton's legislation labels the project, quote, a distortion of American history, and then says the 1619 Project is left-wing propaganda, it's revisionist history at its worst. All right, so this is a quote from the guy who used the words necessary evil to describe a system of torture, rape, and murder for economic gain, but sure, whatever. The article continues. In a written statement, Times spokesman Jordan Cohen said the project is based in part on decades of recent scholarship by leading historians of early America that has profoundly expanded our sense of the colonial and revolutionary period. Much of this scholarship has focused on the central role that slavery played in the nation's founding. Recent scholarship has helped challenge prevailing narratives about our founding that prioritize the ideals of the revolution while paying scant attention to historical realities. If Cotton's legislation passes, school districts that embrace the curriculum would no longer qualify for federal professional development funds, money that is intended to improve teacher quality. Federal funding would also be lowered slightly to reflect any cost associated with teaching the 1619 project, including in planning time and teaching time. Funds tied to low-income or special needs students would not be affected. Okay, so this guy's legislation messes with teacher funding if they want to use the 1619 project, which seems like really low. Teachers are underfunded as it is. Why would you hold that over them? Also, I want to go on a quick tangent and tell you about one of the best teachers I ever had in high school. His name is Mr. Stagg, and I took a sociology class from him my senior year of high school. And something that he emphasized over and over while he lectured was to never just take his word for anything, but always look stuff up for ourselves. He said teaching isn't about brainwashing or convincing us just what he thinks, but teaching us to think for ourselves. And I believe there was one class where he said, if you remember nothing else from this course, remember this, always look stuff up for yourself. Which I guess is basically the inspiration for this podcast too, that you don't have to be an expert to use Google and find out, sleuth out, if you will, the truth for yourself. Anybody can do that. Anybody can know things about history because all you have to do is like look on Wikipedia and tell people that they're lying. That's basically what I'm doing. So thanks for that, Mr. Stagg. Thanks for that inspiration and that good education. He also recently followed me back on Twitter, which I feel like is a kind of achievement. I appreciate that, sir. I hope you and your family are doing well. I think the best teachers are like Mr. Stagg, ones who gives their students the tools they need to learn, not just like a bunch of information. That's not brainwashing, that's empowering. And a good teacher like Mr. Stagg would use the 1619 project to maybe make the students question what they thought they knew about the origins of our country and reframe their perspectives without necessarily adopting all the ideas that the 1619 project presents. I agree that the 1619 project shouldn't be used as a history textbook. It shouldn't be considered this like perfect research compilation, but it does ask questions that we didn't in my high school classes, and I think my education would have been better if we had. Okay, so here's another quote from Senator Cotton in this article. He said, "Curriculum is a matter for local decisions, and if local left-wing school boards want to fill their children's heads with anti-American rot, that's their regrettable choice. But they ought not to benefit from federal tax dollars to teach America's children to hate America." Which, okay, that was a lot. I want to focus on the phrases anti-American rot and teach America's children to hate America. So let me remind you, the subject at hand is American slavery, which isn't anti-American at all. In fact, it is America. And as far as teaching children to hate America, there's a way that you can teach American slavery that doesn't cause people to hate their own country. It's the kind of narrative you put with it, right? So you teach the children the kind of horrors that people faced in dealing with American slavery and the bad decisions that people make, but then you focus on the people who did good and the people who worked for freedom and equal rights and how our country has crawled closer and closer to being one that does fit those ideals our founding fathers had. And it's by continuing to work in the present that we can see a glimmer of hope in the historical narrative, right? But if we're going to continue to ignore things and continue to allow things to be bad, yeah, you might be teaching children to hate America. So you have to work to continue to create equal opportunities for people and to continue to create healing for America from the injuries that American slavery has caused. So yeah, if only Senator Cotton worked at a job where he could make huge changes to the face of our country. I think too, is it really loving of anything to pretend like flaws and issues and problems don't exist? Is it loving to ignore truth and the need for justice? Our country, like I said, is suffering from wounds that are over 400 years old, and I think what would really be anti-American is to refuse to address the origins of those injuries. Think about, too, the Black children in those classrooms. They're Americans, too, and their ancestors' stories are told in the 1619 Project, while oftentimes history classes suffer from only telling white people's stories. So, okay, the article continues. It says, Cotton, who opposed recent efforts by U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren to remove Confederate names, monuments, and symbols from military sites, has accused the 1619 Project of being racially divisive. I like the way that the author put those two things together. Nice job. It says, asked what he'd say to people who consider Confederate statues and military base names racially divisive, Cotton noted that Arkansas is already taking steps to remove its own segregation-era statues. Quote from him, "I have no problem with people debating that in a constructive, reasoned, deliberate fashion," he said. "What I can't tolerate, and what I think no one should tolerate, are angry mobs tearing down statues of anyone. They tear down the statue of Robert E. Lee today. Tomorrow they come for George Washington and for Lincoln and for Grant." So I think it's interesting, too, the article has added here in the quote. I didn't read it because it was written in, it wasn't his direct quote, but they put in Confederate General Robert E. Lee and then Presidents George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant. So I think noting first off that Robert E. Lee is nowhere near on the same level of historical significance as Washington, Lincoln, or Grant. Yeah, which is an important note too. I didn't really notice my first time making notes on this. Okay. So breaking down the quote in its entirety, Senator Cotton is good with debates over history, but not angry mobs tearing down statues of anyone. The way he presents this is like that it's an unthinking, angry mob. And that's actually not true. I did an episode about this already as well, about a Christopher Columbus statue that got taken down. That's episode 4, I believe. And in that episode, I learned that it's often people whose ancestors were oppressed by the people that are memorialized that want that statue taken down, which seems perfectly logical to me. I also think it's kind of funny that he kind of threatens whose statues will be next if we allow Confederate statues to be taken down, like Washington, Lincoln, and Grant. All of these men enslaved people. Yes, even Grant. Washington and Lincoln were my favorite presidents, probably I'd say the best we've had. And they made some good choices during their presidency, but they were also white supremacists. All those things can be true at the same time. Does the racism, though, outweigh the good they did for America? I don't know. Honestly, maybe Cotton is right and we should take down those statues. Food for thought, I suppose. I don't think that's the question or the kind of idea that he wanted us to come through in talking about that, but I don't know, man. This guy's saying lots of stuff. Okay. Here's another quote from him, from Senator Cotton. In the interview, Cotton said, "The role of slavery can't be overlooked." He said, instead of portraying America as, quote, an irredeemably corrupt, rotten, and racist country, the nation should be viewed as an imperfect and flawed land, but the greatest and noblest country in the history of mankind. Okay, so he's just trying to make his point by being very extreme. Institutional racism in this country exists and needs to be dealt with. Our country is not irredeemable because we can recover from this. We can work to dismantle this. Our country is also not the greatest and noblest country in the history of mankind because, again, our founders worked to protect slavery and continue institutional racism, and we still need to do things about that. So he's just wrong on both counts, I guess. The article continues. Its editorial page editor, James Bennett, this is the New York Times. He resigned last month after running a column by Cotton on the possible use of military troops to quell unrest in the nation's cities. Let me remind you, this is unrest as in Black Lives Matter protests. So at this point, we're all well aware of where Cotton stands on race in America. Okay. The paper later said that the piece had fallen short of our standards and should not have been published. In his written statement Friday, the Times spokesman portrayed the 1619 Project as a helpful resource. It is in part due to these prevailing narratives that 60% of teachers polled in a 2017 survey said that they believed their textbook's coverage of slavery was inadequate. We are proud that in partnership with the Pulitzer Center, we have been able to address that problem by making the 1619 Project available as a course supplement that was taught last year in schools in all 50 states. He said, "We believe it is important for American students to understand the truth about their country's history. To paraphrase the historian Alfred F. Young, we should not be so protective of the achievements of equality that we are unwilling to come to grips with inequality." I think that's a good point. Lucas Morell, a Washington and Lee University politics professor and former John Brown University faculty member in Siloam Springs, portrayed Hannah Jones's writing as flawed, though he encourages his own students to study it. If it was the only thing kids were reading about U.S. history, it would actually do more harm than good, in part because there is so much that is left out, he said. What it leaves in is half-truths, falsehoods, boulderizations, and caricatures. Which is kind of he goes in a bit of a different direction, I think, than I did in my criticism. But, yes, the 1619 Project is flawed. However, teaching about American slavery is important, and the 1619 Project encourages discussion about that. So, it's a difficult thing. There's complications and intricacies to this debate and to this argument, but defending slavery is not an option that we should take. Okay, this article finishes up. I know this episode's already been long. There's so much with this. The article finishes up here. Brian Keith Mitchell, a University of Arkansas at Little Rock history professor, said that the 1619 Project separates rhetoric from reality when it examines the Founding Fathers. Quote, "The concept of us having a nation conceived in liberty and justice and freedom, I mean, it was sort of a farce," Mitchell said. He also dismissed claims that the 1619 Project is racially divisive. How would teaching what actually happened be divisive, he asked. The whole point of being educated is to have correct information. It's hard to overstate the role of slavery in the American story. He said it's instrumental in the formation of wealth here, instrumental in the mobility of our nation. The buying and selling of slaves and the things that they produced were the cornerstone of American capitalism. He said there would not be an America, at least not a first world America, without slavery. So, yeah, that was a lot. It seems that Cotton's points were whack. I don't really think he understood the weight of what he said. No, I don't think he understood. However, he is a representative of this country, and his ignorance has no excuse. He needs to be responsible for that, for himself. And he maybe should have fact-checked himself before making sort of these comments. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, I checked out his Twitter just to see what responses he had to all of this, and this is what I've found. He said, "The New York Times 1619 Project is a racially divisive, revisionist account of history that denies the noble principles of freedom and equality which our nation was founded." And then the second one, he said, "This is the definition of fake news." That was kind of in response to one of the articles that I read. "This is the definition of fake news. I said that the founders viewed slavery as a necessary evil and described how they put the evil institution on the path to extinction, a point frequently made by Lincoln." So it seems that he's sticking to his points, which is a bit disappointing. I already unpacked what's wrong with these statements. Remember that one quote I told you to remember? That was just his second tweet. He's still sticking by his bad interpretation of history and using a white supremacist as a shield to continue to defend how historical Americans handled slavery. So I'm feeling a little depressed by all of this. I am very disappointed. There was a interesting Twitter thread that I saw while trying to dig through Tom Cotton's Twitter as well, that I think sums up these things very, very neatly. Also, I retweeted it on the Sleuth History account, at Sleuth History. So if you follow me there, then you already saw it. And if you're not following me, you missed out. But it was a good thread, and I'm going to read some of it to you now. It's from Seth Kotler. He said, "The conservative freakout about the 1619 Project, of which Cotton is just the latest example, is not about history. It's about memory, about what parts of the nation's past we should hold in our memories going forward, and how we should tell the story of the nation to our children. The history remains the history. We can't change what happened. But what always changes is how we pick out parts of the nation's past and bring them into our present. Cotton wants to return to how he was taught history in his Arkansas high school, as if that's the quote-unquote real history. It's easy for white families that benefited from slavery and Jim Crow to say that's all behind us now, no need to remember it, because they have the luxury of thinking that they live outside of that history. So when people like Cotton, the beneficiary of 7 generations of white supremacy and settler colonialism, says that we need to pay more attention to the great white men who built America and less attention to slavery, well, I'm not buying it. Tom Cotton is trying to use his power as a U.S. Senator to silence black historians and journalists who have brought forward parts of American history that make him uncomfortable, that he'd rather not reckon with. Well, that history is there whether he likes it or not. This memory/history distinction is also useful when we think about statues. A statue of someone is not history, it's a site of memory. Our historical memory has and will always change over time, hence the statues we put up and take down will change over time. It's really okay. And developing a bit of empathy and understanding for the lives that black people lived in the American past might, just might, make you a bit more willing to acknowledge and even utter the words that Black Lives Matter today. So a final note before we go, because this has been a lot and I'm tired. And it's not that I can say anything better than that thread did, because that was really good and I really like that. But the Founding Fathers, Lincoln, people who were alive when slavery existed, they don't need you to defend them. You don't have to make excuses for them. They're dead. They don't care about you. They made their choices, for better or for white supremacy. I forgot I wrote that joke in there. I meant for worse, right? Get it? Because white supremacy is bad. Okay, our responsibility now is to work to clearly see what impact our choices made and how we can make this world a better place on top of and in spite of races. And that's all I've got for you guys. I'll see you in the next episode.